Thanks very much for joining us, Cam. And CoreLogic, your company in ANZ, has just launched this new affordability report. A wealth of data, obviously, in the report itself, but it goes up to December 18. What have you seen in the first half of this year, the first 6 months? Those trends of sort of quite quickly improving national affordability, are you seeing those persist?
We certainly are. So far, over the first 5 months of this year, we have seen quite a big drop in dwelling values in a number of areas. So probably most prominently Sydney and Melbourne, where we do have the largest housing affordability pressures. But most other capital cities and regional areas of the country are seeing declines in dwelling values, which will mean that housing affordability does improve.
And I suppose there's been two dramatic events since the report closed off. There's the government has been returned, and therefore there's a certain amount of stability in policy around housing there. And the second thing is the Reserve Bank of Australia has cut rates once already,
Yep.
Probably another 2 or 3 times. Are those factors going to change how you were looking at the affordability issue across the last 6 months?
I think it does change the market quite a bit. So firstly, the opposition, federal opposition, were obviously talking about some pretty significant changes around investment housing in particular, negative gearing and the capital gains tax discount. They've now passed, and there does seem to be a little bit more confidence out there in the market. As you said, we've had an interest rate cut, and I think that, realistically an interest rate cut's because the economy is slowing and needs some more stimulus, but from a housing perspective, it can mean that your mortgage is a little bit cheaper. And we've also had APRA announcing that they're looking at reducing the serviceability buffer, and I think all of those three things are positive for the housing market. So our view was that the market would probably stop falling middle of next year. We think that now comes forward to the end of this year. But I think the important thing to say is that we still believe that it's going to be much more difficult than it has been in the past to access finance. Credit growth is still going to be a lot slower than it has been, and that means that the recovery is going to be fairly slow. So if household income growth can continue to be stronger than any growth we see in property prices, then we will see a further improvement in affordability.
And buried not buried in the data, but not something that's covered explicitly here, is the demographics of the house buying population in Australia. But you've mentioned on the launch of the report that first home buyers are getting older, and not only that, some people don't want to be first home buyers at all. So what are you seeing in that demographic makeup of the buying public?
Well, I think the aspiration is generally still to own your own home, but I think in some of the larger cities like Sydney and Melbourne, younger people are discovering that it's not a reality for them, particularly not at this stage. And we're talking about early 30-year-olds that can't afford property. So if you can't afford a property, you need to look for alternatives. So this is why we've seen increasing evidence of rent vesting, renting where you want to live, buying an investment property elsewhere. I think it's also why build to rent is becoming more prevalent, or at least they're talking about build to rent a lot more, because the biggest challenge with renting in Australia is, yes, it's generally cheaper than having a mortgage, but you don't have any security in your tenancy. You can end up having to move every 12 or 18 months. So if people can get some security, get a lease for 5 or 10 years and know that they're going to be living there for that time, they can make it their own home, I think that's kind of a good compromise between, yes, those people can't afford to buy their own home, but at least they've got some security of tenancy.
Thanks for your time today.
No worries. Thank you, Andrew.